finishing other panels. So what we think we should do is we will not have the opening remarks now. I think I lost the connection. Do you hear me? Okay. So we start the conversation, the discussion with the panelists that are here, and then we'll give some closing remark to the yeah. So yeah, maybe. Okay, so yeah, we transform the opening remarks to closing remarks later on. So let us start. Yesterday we had within the framework of the Congo Basin pavilion, but not here exactly, in another pavilion, but with the Minister Soudan Nono, a conversation on the importance of sovereign markets for carbon. We have two parallel tracks. One that is related to the Paris Agreement on the Article 6 of Paris Agreement, and here in Dubai, we expect some move on that. So at least we can then go ahead with the Article 6. So these are the compliance, I would say, part of the carbon is moving, and hope we will move the right direction here in Dubai. But at the same time, we have the voluntary market that is happening, I would say. Even in Africa is not having that much, is not participating that much. But we have some African countries selling carbon at a very low price for different reasons. One of them, and the major reason, is the integrity of the market that is not considered as high, because all the necessary tools, protocols, registries, the institutions that build the trust around, in that market are not yet at that level where you can sell your carbon at the voluntary market at the same or at a price that is not far from what the northern or the developed countries are experiencing. So, and of course, this is even not close or not very far to the one of the compliance market, which is, for instance, in Europe, is beyond the 100 euro per ton. So you see the gap, and there is here a potential, a development potential for African countries, because they are struggling also from a budgetary side. So we fully understand that these countries that are experiencing, and this the ministers and the governments that are experiencing this constraint, this budgetary constraint, they need immediately resources to respond to these challenges, and this has been also exacerbated by the COVID, and leaving many countries under debt distress, etc. So they don't have the choice today. But our role as institutions, particularly for UNECA as a Pan-African institution, is to support these countries and to bring the partners together to support the countries to rapidly change the situation, particularly the price situation, to really increase the price of the carbon on the voluntary market, but also to start to work on the sovereign market to bring the countries, or to the weight of the countries of in this even in this market, this voluntary market, to have a greater weight on that. So you see the full story is really to connect all these the two main tracks, and this now the role of these sovereign markets in the middle of these two tracks. So this is what our conversation is about today. I mean, the impact could be very important. At ECA, we have conducted some studies recently on if we move from a price from $10 to 25, 50, and to close to what we find on the compliance market, and the studies have indicated that per year it could bring $82 billion for the African countries. But beyond that, it's really beyond. This is crucial. This is very important. But beyond that, it's also a question of sovereignty, for making sure that the countries also are in somehow rule makers in these emerging markets, I would say, and could influence these markets, and to also use not only to sell the carbon as a commodity, but also to use this carbon as a component of their new competitiveness when it comes to Europe is implementing the CBAM. So. And we are expecting all the main markets, North America, Asian market, implementing similar measures at the border. So carbon will become more and more a critical commodity, and it's very important for the member states, for the countries, to really master and to keep this sovereignty on how they can use strategically this commodity, not just exporting a raw commodity, but also I'm making a reference to since the 60s we were talking about the necessity to transform the commodities on the continent. It's still a debate, a very active debate. So for the carbon, it's something similar. Of course, it's important to sell the carbon at a decent price, but it's also to be able and to keep the sovereignty to use it for instance, an acceleration of the industrialization, of green industrialization on the continent through the FCFTA. So you see there are plenty of dimensions and that are connected here. So it's really important to, while the countries are putting in place the mechanisms and the institutions, is really that important that we have a deep conversation, and we learn also from experiences from the other regions. So that's why I'm happy also to have with us Isabelle Durand, who is the president of the group of experts on the right to the development from the the Human Rights Council. I was looking for the English name, the Human Rights Council, and previously the Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD. And even in a previous role, you played a role as a Vice President of the European Union Parliament, and also in your country as Vice Prime Minister of Belgium. So you followed very closely the building of the regional market in Europe, the carbon market, from the national perspective from your country, but also from the European Union institution. And then, of course, you had the ability from the UN Development Agency, the UNCTAD, to really see how this regional market could play a role for other parts of the world. So we'll be very happy to hear from you on the lesson learned and how this could benefit Africa. Jean-Paul Adam, who is currently the director of the Office of Special Advisor to the SG for Africa in New York. Also, you had in your previous life, of course, you were also in ECA, director of the climate change, technology, natural resource management, but also in previous life, minister of economy, of blue economy as well, and you were very involved also in something not far from the carbon market, but it has a connection with the carbon market. In the launching of this blue bond, Seychelles was the first country in the world launching a blue bond that is related to the ocean, and now Seychelles has developed really very interesting capacities in blue carbon. So and there are also a lot of lessons to learn from Seychelles, particularly for the other African countries, for the islands, but not only the islands, when it comes to how to value this potential and to make it really real. So we will start with these two panelists, and then we will continue. So Isabelle, maybe both of you, I ask if you could join us here. So there's no specific question apart, really, if you could share with us your experience as we are trying to build regional markets. ECA started the work with the CCBC, with the Congo Basin Climate Commission. We are just starting with the Island Commission, African Island Climate Commission, and we would like to expand this with the Sahel Commission. So from your experience both, what are the key elements, the key challenges you think if we need to go regional that really are crucial and very important to consider? Isabelle.
So, thank you, Nassim, for this invitation to share various experience from the carbon market and the emission trade system that the European Union put in place a long time ago. It was in 2003 that we started on the European level to build this market. And why? The goal is it's very different than the goal in Africa. The goal for the European Union was especially to decrease the level of emission. For Africa or for developing countries, the first goal is really to have enough money and be able to sell credit in order to finance development and, of course, just transition, etc., adaptation, etc. But that's important to know that our goals are totally, from the beginning, very different. But the European Union made different mistakes. And I remember when I was member of the European Parliament, we criticized a lot the system. Why? Not the principle of the system, but the mistake which was done in the beginning. First of all, on the pressure from several lobbies, we were giving some free allowances to companies. And doing that, of course, the price of the carbon ton decreased a lot. Because, of course, the interest of enterprises was not big enough because they could receive free allowances. That's a big mistake that probably Africa has not to do. Secondly, we put in place different mechanisms also under pressure from the different big industrial sector in Europe, which doesn't want really to decrease the emission and invest in green industrialization. So they also, we put in place a clean mechanism. Those clean mechanisms, it was a system which was really jeopardized by companies, and that's another problem. It's a possibility of speculation if you are not aware, because the companies use this clean mechanism because it was less expensive to buy credit, and they buy the credit on a very low price and they sell it back later with a higher price. So it was full benefit for companies and zero benefit and even less benefit for the European Union as such, and especially the goal of reducing of emission. Third element, that's why I think that voluntary markets are important, but it's probably not enough, even if it's a step. It's important to avoid what we call in Europe the carbon leakages. What does it mean? It means that, of course, a lot of companies, because it was more expensive to develop industrialization in Europe, they delocalized companies in the south where there is no regulation, and it's why it's important to have something which is as big as possible. Of course, we would like to have that on worldwide level. Well, it's not the case today, step by step. Nevertheless, the fact that some companies could delocalize the production to avoid the rules of the regulation on carbon market, it's something that we have to avoid. So that's three elements which were really problematic, and in the first 10 years, the price of the ton on the European level was very low, between 10 and 20 more or less euro per ton. It's not enough to be a real incentive. So finally, step by step and after review to adapt the system, we achieved the last years a better price, 100 euro per ton, but also we will complement that with the CBAM. And the CBAM, and I know how the CBAM is perceived by a lot of African countries. It's perceived as a kind of green protectionism. And I agree that sometimes, even as a European, I think that it was decided unilaterally by the European institution for a good reason, but without enough conversation, discussion, and exchange with the countries, especially in Africa. It's Mozambique and several countries, because the sector are cement and steel. So that's the biggest producers in Africa. Of course, they are not very happy, and probably they will try to fight in the WTO in order to avoid the implementation of the CBAM. So it's why it's important in the next years to discuss together and try not only that the European could explain, but also to look what has to be adapted in order to avoid, really to incentivize the countries to develop green industrialization, especially in cement and steel, but more than that, to identify what can be given back to the countries. And I think that the income of the CBAM, partially the proceeds have to be back, to be paid for transition or technological transfer or training for people, because, and that's my last point, you mentioned that, Nassim, a carbon market is a complex market, and you need, as breadth, regulation, transparency, clear regulation, known by everybody, registration, certification, an independent authority, not the government, not the private sector, but an independent authority to really monitor the market. Otherwise, you will have the same problem as the European Union, with lobbyists, with a lot of speculation about the benefit that you can find. Finally, I think that, and I speak as a human rights person, I think that it's important to look at the carbon market as a tool to develop also an inclusive and a rights, especially for indigenous people and for a lot of people in the country, sometimes forgotten or left behind, of a lot of activities. So I think that green industrialization has to take into account that we have also to include a lot of people completely excluded. So the carbon market is not just an issue for economists and government, but it's also something which has to serve the people and to have local co-benefits. So I fully support the building of something like that in Africa, step by step, voluntary on first level, but I hope that we can go further on African level, probably within the African Free Trade Area. That's something which can be built in this framework with the African Union support, even if we know how complicated it could be, because the difference between countries in Africa is so huge that, of course, the capacity to develop a real market, it has to be done not on national level, at least regional level, and if possible on continental level. Finally, Africa Europe Foundation, that I am member of, is also working on that in full complementarity with the Commission for Africa. So I think that we have really to gather experiences, competence, skills, and what is done on the ground in order to build properly something which is useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabelle, for these very important and crucial points, and particularly the last one on the communities living in these spaces, areas, and because one complication we have also, we are struggling with on this carbon is the very bad publicity that it has in some countries where there are deals that totally ignore this dimension, and where these communities they don't even have access to that territories that where they were living since centuries. So this is really something very important, and fully agree with you. Acting at the regional level, even on that dimension, will help us to really get the standards at a level where this dimension is at the center of this carbon issue, if we want to achieve a sustainable development and inclusive through that carbon, and to have it as a lever for sustainable, inclusive and sustainable development. Jean-Paul, so it's the same question from your experience, past and current, while we are building in this journey of building a regional carbon markets in the benefit of the people of Africa. What would be your advice and your views on that?
Thank you very much, Nassim. Can you hear me? Is it okay? So I'd like to start by maybe going back a little bit to the rationale of why the United Nations is supporting the work on carbon markets. And this has been very much demand-driven by countries. Nassim mentioned that in my previous role I was working at ECA, and we saw that countries such as the Republic of Congo and many other countries of the Congo Basin, they have recognized that they have this huge natural capital which currently cannot be monetized. And in fact, they are taking it upon themselves to protect this natural asset, but are unable to derive the real value that it represents for the planet. And carbon markets are perhaps one of the mechanisms that could allow us to recognize what the true value of this natural capital. But we have to make sure that it's done in a way which doesn't precisely undermine the value of that capital. And I think that we recently saw at the Nairobi Climate Summit that carbon markets were at the center of attention, and sometimes not for the right reasons. We are at a tipping point where many organizations and civil society are questioning, are carbon markets just a get-out-of-jail-free card for polluters? And we have to accept that in some cases, that's the way they have been used. They have been used against the intention to not truly decarbonize, but to shift the responsibility for sequestering emissions away from the rich north and into the global south with minimal value for the local communities. However, it's actually, in my opinion, a positive thing that this conversation happens. Because if we do not have that conversation, if we do not address this critical issue of integrity, then we will not make any progress. And we have to weed out the bad actors to be able to make progress. And this is where I think fundamental to that is building capacity within countries and regionally to address this issue of integrity. And I think the regional mechanism, in particular the regional registry, which has been developed for the Congo Basin, is part of this strategy of creating the architecture for integrity. You have a common and harmonized protocol for the whole region. It means that there is a standard at which you are setting that can be used by all countries. Secondly, this kind of mechanism can help to address the needs of specific populations, because the focus should be on developing projects at the local level which simultaneously meet the needs in terms of sequestration, but deliver real value for populations on the ground. And we started the conversation, you made the point, Nassim, about being able to tap into compliance markets elsewhere, in Europe or in Asia, in other parts of the world, where compliance markets deliver a much higher value. And I would say that in the current scenario, we cannot have one without the other. The two framed under the Paris Agreement in any case, and we need to build capacity for both. And the danger for Africa is that as the progress is happening on the compliance markets or on the Article 6 negotiations at the global level, the experience of the voluntary market has not been developed sufficiently. There is not enough focus on the integrity, and there is not enough project pipeline which is aligned with the needs of communities. So these are the current gaps, but by working regionally through the Congo Basin Climate Commission and on other climate commissions within Africa, such as the Islands Climate Commission and the Climate Commission for the Sahel, we can help build that base capacity, which is where the flow of finance goes to deliver the most impact. And to conclude, I would say that the proper delivery of carbon markets on the African continent is about the change of economic model. So it is about moving away from this purely extractive model towards one which is situated within the needs of communities and being able to monetize the value that that brings more broadly in terms of sustainability. And I would like to mention that I think that for Africa, we must be proactive in going beyond carbon markets and already anticipating biodiversity credits, for example. We need to be looking at the additional ways which we can monetize the opportunity of Africa's natural capital, which is the richest in the world, but which is currently under-recognized, undervalued, and often treated as a secondary aspect in trade, for example, and in the way in which we treat industrial development. And if we can truly value those natural assets, starting with voluntary carbon markets, then building towards sale in compliance markets to get higher prices, and then anticipating and actively developing a market as well for biocredits, biodiversity credits, which also could be traded in a transparent and high integrity manner. So I think that we must be recognizing that, and maybe I will disagree a little bit with Isabel, but not completely, because we're on the same line, but I do think that the main focus in the immediate is to get resources for Africa's sustainable development. So yes, we want to empower communities to be able to generate credits for them to get resources. But I do believe that the decarbonization angle is also needs to happen at the same time.
I fully agree.
You agree, yes. So the decarbonization aspect needs to happen at the same time. And we should recognize that the existing carbon economy in Africa is highly subsidized, sometimes subsidized by the global north, not only from within Africa. The Climate Policy Initiative published a paper last year that showed that the value of subsidies for fossil fuels in the African continent is $34 billion per year. So already there is a lot of money going into unproductive relative sectors. And if you incentivize the growth towards climate positive aspects, then we can truly invest in the positive development, the climate positive growth that we want to see. And the final point about CBAM is that there is actually an opportunity precisely for this differential comparative advantage for Africa, because while a lot of the existing products, because Africa is in an extractive model of export, so a lot of the products are currently seen as brown or contributing to the problem. And therefore, we tend to look at the trade in its existing terms. However, on the other side is that you could theoretically deliver value chains in Africa in a much more competitive way than other regions. So it is actually a time for an African industrial revolution, but on the basis of low carbon development. And I think this is the premise of the Nairobi summit. But the problem with CBAM is that it does not recognize the steps to get there. As you have said, Isabel, it is unilaterally imposed. And we still do not know the linkages as yet as to how that technological transfer, that finance transfer, that investment will happen to really facilitate this in Africa. Because if we start on the status quo, then we are simply taxing businesses and industries in Africa, which currently, yes, are not sustainable. But if we restrict those businesses, we will not, in the immediate, without a transition plan, we don't necessarily improve the situation. But I think that the work that we want to do is about empowering African countries to do it themselves, and this starts with building high-integrity registries and building the capacity for these types of carbon credit projects within the continent.
Nassim, if you allow me just to say that I fully agree with you. I want just to focus on the starting point.
Yes.
And the starting point of the carbon market in the EU was a starting point on decreasing emission. The starting point, only the starting point for Africa is the question of sell the credit and try to finance development. But I fully agree that we have really to encourage through the CBAM and other tools the green industrialization of Africa, diversification and fair and trade, including the question of the raw material and all those extractive issues, in order to develop it very greenly, if I may say. So just to avoid any misunderstanding.
And to be a bit provocative, maybe, I think we are on the same lines.
Yeah.
But to be a bit provocative in the African context, why not that we anticipate developing an African carbon market which is truly continental, where we are really looking ahead towards accelerating not just the transition, because the first goal is not decarbonization, the first goal is development. But by focusing on decarbonized development, we can actually go on faster growth, because comparatively, Africa has more assets in this context. Critical minerals, for example, ECA has done studies that show that it will cost 50% less to invest in these value chains in Africa than in any other region. Currently, the main market, the main area where this value addition is done in China. In Africa, you can do it for 50% less cost and 50% less emissions, just as an example.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we need to leave around 2, but we can have some few minutes. But not just quickly. Thank you very much, Jean-Paul. Definitely on the last point, carbon is more than a commodity. It has to be seen as a really a critical commodity, and to support this industrialization and the revenues that it could create are definitely potentially much more higher. On the point also on biocredit, on the biodiversity, this is the next big issue, the big elephant in the room. And the difference, I would say, with the carbon is really, when the introduction of the session, I was talking about rule making. I mean, on carbon, Africa is rule taker. It's too late to change the rules. On the biocredit, on the biodiversity, there's no rule at all. So Africa could be really apart from the rule makers. And this can totally change the story. So it's really important for Africa to jump quickly on that, and to be ready, and to guide and to lead that journey on the biocredit, really to make the most from its biodiversity and to use it for its own development. We have been joined by Commissioner Tabuna from the États. So we switched to French. We don't have interpretation, but the majority, I think, are bilingual. But I think his passion and his interest for this even if you are not francophone, you will understand what Commissioner Tabuna is, as Commissioner of Environment of CEAC, of ECAS, is intended to do, to go regional, to make sure that the countries of ECAS, of CEAC, that have tremendous potential in carbon, but also in biodiversity, could do by going together. Monsieur le Commissaire, je vous invite à prendre la parole. Je vous invite au pupitre. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Nassim. Merci beaucoup pour cette invitation. Merci beaucoup pour la CBCC qui nous accueille ici pour parler du marché du carbone. Tout le monde en parle aujourd'hui. Hein, tout le monde en parle, marché du carbone, qu'est-ce que c'est? Je suis commissaire en charge de l'environnement, des ressources naturelles, de l'agriculture et du développement rural au sein de la commission de la communauté économique des États de l'Afrique centrale, qui est une des 8 communautés économiques régionales de l'Union africaine. Nous avons 11 États membres, et pas les moindres. L'Angola, le Burundi, le Cameroun, le Congo, le Gabon, la Guinée équatoriale, la République centrafricaine, la République démocratique du Congo, Sao Tomé et Principe et Tchad. L'Afrique centrale abrite le 2e massif forestier tropical au monde. Nous sortons là, à la fin du mois d'octobre, au sommet des 3 bassins forestiers, pour préciser le rôle de ces 3 bassins dans, entre autres, la régulation du climat. Ces 3 bassins nous ont permis d'avoir des produits comme l'avocat, des produits comme le palmier à huile, des produits comme l'EVEA. Donc aujourd'hui, on sait vendre l'EVEA, on sait vendre le bois, mais peut-être qu'on ne sait pas vendre les services écosystémiques. Nous allons donc apprendre comment vendre tout ce qui n'est pas palpable, tout ce qui n'est pas tangible. Et en Afrique, nous sommes en train de nous développer et notre développement s'est basé sur les ressources naturelles, notamment le pétrole et les minerais, qu'on peut vendre. Mais jusqu'à aujourd'hui, tout ce qui est service, ce n'est pas encore développé. Comme l'hôtellerie, l'écotourisme. Déjà, ce type de service n'est pas encore bien vendu. Mais combien de fois les services écosystémiques, il y en a plusieurs, mais retenons seulement le carbone. Alors, donc à la CEAC, tenant compte des ambitions de nos États membres de se développer, nous avons commencé au sortir de Rio en 1992 à commencer à mettre d'abord un cadre institutionnel. Parce que nous avons les États, nous avons la société civile, nous avons le secteur privé, nous avons les populations, nous avons cette biodiversité, et nous avons les partenaires, la CEA, le PNUD, mais comment s'organiser pour se développer. Alors, au cours de l'année 2009, à Copenhague, nous nous sommes rendus compte que nous n'étions pas suffisamment organisés pour développer tout un système qui devait concilier et la lutte contre les changements climatiques et le développement économique. Et c'est ainsi que nous avons mis en place le système de l'économie verte en Afrique centrale, qui est pour nous une vision, une approche, un outil et un modèle justement pour lier le développement économique et la protection de l'environnement, notamment la lutte contre les changements climatiques. Ce système donc a été adopté par les chefs d'État avec plusieurs piliers, parce qu'il faut qu'on s'organise. Parce qu'on s'est rendu compte qu'en Afrique, on fait des choses, on fait des activités, on fait des projets, sans pour autant qu'en haut, qu'on ait une politique, qu'on ait une stratégie et qu'on ait des programmes. On s'est lancé dans des projets sans pourtant qu'on... Et sur ces questions liées à l'économie de l'environnement, à l'économie verte, on a laissé seulement la main au ministère de l'Environnement, au ministère des Forêts. Mais les ministères clés dans le développement d'un pays, dans le développement d'une économie, les ministères des Finances sont souvent très éloignés. Alors que c'est eux qui doivent prendre des décisions. Voilà pourquoi, dans ce que nous avons fait, nous avons d'abord réuni les ministres en charge de l'environnement, les ministres des Affaires étrangères, parce qu'il faut faire de la diplomatie. Là, nous sommes dans un cadre de diplomatie. Et nous avons réuni également les ministres des Finances pour qu'ils comprennent qu'il s'agit du développement et il faut mettre de l'argent là-dedans. Et après, nous avons réuni tous ces ministres ensemble pour que tous comprennent qu'il s'agit d'un problème transversal. C'est ainsi que les ministres des Finances, tout le monde a adopté. Et parmi les outils ou bien les piliers, je vais retenir ici le pilier opérationnel et technique pour rendre les choses concrètes. Parce que les populations veulent des choses concrètes. Les États veulent des choses concrètes. Et c'est ainsi que parmi les programmes qu'on avait proposés aux États, en 2010 déjà, le programme sur le développement de l'économie du carbone, qui va depuis la recherche, la formation, l'innovation, le développement des entreprises et le partenariat. Alors, concernant le marché du carbone, comme j'ai dit au début, tout le monde en parle. Mais il est comme tous les marchés au monde. On a l'impression qu'on parle des marchés différents. Il est comme tous les marchés du monde. Tous les marchés se construisent. Donc, nous sommes en train de penser qu'aujourd'hui, il faut avoir une approche régionale, première chose. Deuxième chose, parler du marché national, régional, avant même d'aller sur le marché international. Parce que nous avons des entreprises qui produisent des gaz à effet de serre au niveau de la sous-région. Il faut que ces entreprises-là soient déjà au courant qu'il y a un marché du crédit du carbone qui est en train de se développer et qu'elles participent à ça. Alors, un dernier point, c'est la question de la recherche, l'innovation et la formation. Aujourd'hui, on a peu d'informations sur les volumes que peuvent capter réellement nos forêts. Donc, il faudrait qu'avant même d'aller sur le marché, qu'on sache quelle est la capacité que nos forêts sont capables de séquestrer comme carbone. Donc, on a posé de la recherche. Pour terminer, parce qu'on me fait des signes, alors je pense que nous sommes maintenant bien organisés. Nous avons la CEA, nous avons le PNUD, nous avons la CEAC, nous avons tout le monde. Et donc, puisque nous sommes dans le business, on peut avoir un consortium. Et comme ça, on va attribuer le rôle aux uns et aux autres pour que nous arrivons à obtenir les résultats. Et donc, pour la CEAC, donc je voulais encore vous remercier de tout le travail qu'on peut faire ensemble pour atteindre les objectifs. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Commissaire, et merci aussi aux collègues de la session suivante d'être patients. Nous terminons cette session. Nous avions une présentation, mais nous n'allons pas la faire, mais nous allons veiller à la rendre disponible. Elle sera aussi sur le site de la CEA, qui présente les registres que nous avons développés pour la commission climat. Et je tiens à remercier là mon collègue Louis Lubango, qui vraiment guide ce travail que nous faisons avec cette commission climat du bassin du Congo et que nous commençons à faire avec la commission climat des îles africaines et que nous allons faire bientôt avec la commission climat du Sahel. Bien sûr, la CEAC est un partenaire privilégié parce que elle travaille énormément avec le bassin du Congo. Elle a le portage politique très fort et effectivement, monsieur le commissaire a rappelé combien c'était important d'avoir ce portage politique pour pouvoir transformer les choses en des choses concrètes. Donc merci beaucoup encore une fois. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience and thanks for the next session for being very patient. Thank you and see you.
Merci.